Hi, everybody, and welcome for the Royal Voluntary Service. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Gemma Newman, and I've been asked by the Royal Voluntary Service to come and talk to you guys today about harnessing the power of plants. As you might know, there's been a lot of marketing around it this month. It's Veganuary. Some of you may have tried it before. Some of you may have tried meat-free Mondays. But I thought, what a lovely opportunity this January to find out a bit more about plant-based diets and how they can benefit us, how they can benefit the planet, and how, of course, they can benefit the animals. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I hope that you find the talk interesting and engaging. Feel free to leave your comments, please do. You're able to leave them and we can see them. I can't see them at the moment, but I will definitely be looking at all the comments at the end of the talk. And so please, as you think of something, any questions that you've got, just write them in the comment box and I'll be sure to hopefully be able to address them. So this is a picture of me at work. I am a GP. I've been a family doctor for many years now. I've been a doctor for nearly 20 years. And I've seen all sorts of things throughout my clinical practice. At the moment, I'm a senior partner at a busy NHS surgery, which is not far from Heathrow Airport. And trust me when I say I've seen pretty much everything. And one of the things I really loved about medicine when I went into it was the idea of saving lives in slow motion. I was never one to enjoy the frantic crash call, although I obviously did it for many years. I was quite relieved to go into general practice where I could get to know people and their families over a long period of time. Although something really did bother me throughout the course of the early years of my practice, I felt as though, people weren't really getting better. I was just giving them pills to tinker with their blood pressure, tinker with their diabetes, monitoring them, examining them, chatting things through. But I felt as though people were just gradually declining. And it was quite a challenge to realize that despite my best efforts, people were still suffering greatly. And I see many of the causes of chronic disease every day in my practice. 1 in 2 of us will suffer from a cancer now in our lifetimes, which is actually pretty remarkable. 1 in 2 of us. So if we haven't directly experienced cancer, it's certain that we will probably love somebody who is dealing with that. Heart disease, although rates of heart disease have come down significantly over the last 40 years or so, it's still the leading cause of preventable death in the UK. And diabetes, of course, is on the rise. It's the largest chronic disease that many of us will live with. Many millions of us live with diabetes in the UK. And actually several million walking around without even realizing they have diabetes. So again, it's a major cause of things like heart disease as well, which is our leading cause of death. So a little bit more about me. Throughout my life, I've been various shapes and sizes, various levels of fitness. The picture of me on the left was shortly after I graduated from medicine. I was working hard as a junior doctor. I was doing a lot of late night shifts and long hours. I wasn't looking after my health. I'd just grab the first thing I could find in the doctor's mess. It was a very busy routine that I was in, and I was really lacking in energy. I was really happy as well. I was doing the job I loved, and I felt content in myself, but my energy was a big problem. I'd get home from my long shifts and I'd almost be falling asleep at the dinner table. So tired was I with my newfound job. And I realized that what I was doing wasn't sustainable for me. If I was going to continue to be a doctor well into my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I needed to be able to have the energy to do the job well. So I decided to do what many people do, and I started to count calories. I started to exercise daily. I had a lot of chicken, a lot of salads, and I was pleased. I got a lot more energy. I was able to shrink my dress size down quite a few sizes, down to a size 8. And, it felt like I'd really achieved something great. And I wanted to be able to share that with my patients. But at the same time, I hadn't done much research. I didn't really feel confident in giving nutritional advice because what I'd learned at medical school was primarily learning about nutritional deficiencies, not necessarily how to live optimally. And also, what I began to realize throughout my 20s was that despite my peak optimal physical condition, I still had a raised cholesterol. And this really bothered me because I realized I'm just going to skip a slide. I realized that there was a strong history of heart disease in my own family. So the picture at the top is my grandfather and my grandmother. And sadly, my grandfather died suddenly of a heart attack whilst playing tennis. He was quite young, he was 60. And then my father on the bottom, he was 59 when he died suddenly of a heart attack whilst driving. So both of the deaths were a big shock. And sadly, they both occurred in a situation where I think it could have been prevented. But at the time, I didn't realize that. And I thought, well, it's just my genetic fate. It's my genetic destiny. So I carried on as I was. Then my husband, who's on the picture here on the right, discovered plant-based nutrition. He was training for a marathon. He was getting constant inflammation. He had to stop training. And he thought, well, what can I do to help improve my technique? He looked into how he was running, his footwear. He read lots around it. And he decided, actually, well, what I really need to do is figure out, what do the ultra runners do? People that run 2, 3, 4 marathons in one go, how do they sustain themselves? So he started to do some research. He found the book Finding Ultra by Rich Roll. He found another book by Brendan Brazier called Thrive. And Scott Jurek, arguably one of the most well-known ultra runners on the planet. Also, I think he wrote Born to Run. He was reading all this and he realized that they all had one thing in common. They had a plant-based diet. So he decided to give it a go. I was quite strongly against it at the time, thinking that he'd develop a nutritional deficiency, worried that our friends would never invite us for dinner. There was a lot of judgment around plant-based diets, especially at that time, probably still in many circles. But I watched with curiosity, and sure enough, his athletic performance began to really improve. He was no longer getting the same inflammation that he was. He could complete his marathon training runs. He was able to look after the kids after a morning doing a half marathon or a marathon distance. And amazingly, he was able to run a marathon an hour and 10 minutes faster than he previously could. And he really got my attention, which is when I started to do my own research into the literature. And what I discovered was really interesting, that having a predominantly plant-based diet was actually not only really useful for athletic performance, but for my patients, because that's, of course, what I was really interested in. I was interested in helping people with heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, all the things I see day in, day out. And there was a multitude of data to suggest that it could even be helpful for not only preventing diseases, but in some cases reversing them. So I decided to give it a go. And you'll see here on the right, this is me after some time on a plant-based diet. I'm feeling very energetic, as you can see, full of vitality based on the vitality run that we were doing right there. And I began to realize those personal benefits. And I could see in my own family and in the people that I love, as I mentioned before, heart disease was rife. Also, we had diabetes in our family. And unfortunately, we also have cancer in our family. So not only was it something personal to me and my family background, but also for my patients. And as doctors, it's really common for us to look at one thing rather than looking at the big picture. Now, as a GP, I'm trained to aim to look at the big picture as much as possible. But I really love this picture because to me, it's really an analogy of how we look at wellness. We can look at one part of something and think that that's all that there is. But actually, when you take a step back and look at the big picture, you realize the elephant in the room. And that is that we simply are not getting to the root cause of a lot of what ails us in society at the moment. And looking at that big picture is really important. I talked about my own family history and in my desire to help my patients, but also let's look at planetary health, because we can't really have healthy humans without a healthy planet. I'm sure you'll agree. And environmental scientists have been telling us this for quite a long time. Interestingly, the nutritional science is also really catching up with this as well. There was a really interesting report called the Eat Lancet Commission, which involved many dietitians, nutritionists, and researchers, and they promoted what was called a planetary diet, because what they wanted to do was find a way to make as many humans healthy as possible in a sustainable way. And what they concluded was that many of us would have to adopt a far more plant-based diet if we were going to be able to achieve those goals. The British Dietetic Association recognises this as well, and they set up their One Blue Dot campaign, which was to help people to undertake an environmentally sustainable diet. And again, they realised that plant-based nutrition was a great way of doing that. And for me, certainly before the pandemic times, there were lots of other reasons why I was a bit more concerned about animal agriculture. I realized that a lot of crops were being grown where rainforests should have been, but also I was worried about how the animals were raised, because for many of them, there's a lot of overcrowding. And so we have to give them antibiotics to keep them healthy. And when I discovered that the vast majority of antibiotics that we consume are actually from the meat products that we eat, I began to get worried. There's a big emphasis in general practice, as I'm sure you know, on education around giving out antibiotics unnecessarily. Sometimes we have viral infections that don't respond to antibiotics, and I'm sure many of you will have had a GP be a little bit reluctant to prescribe antibiotics when they weren't necessary. But here we are consuming antibiotics through the food that we eat, and I realized that that was the largest source of antibiotics in our lifestyles. And that worried me, because the UN tells us that actually there's going to be approximately 10 million extra deaths as a result of antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance, in just a few short years' time, between 2030 and 2050. 10 million extra human deaths. And that's something that does concern me, because I see a lot of patients now who are not responding to antibiotics when they have infections. And it may make us come to a time where routine operations are more difficult because of the inability to prevent infections, which is something that really did worry me before the pandemic. But then, of course, we had our pandemic situation. Now, lots of people debate the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. I think most people are on the side that it was probably from the wet market in Wuhan. But regardless of where this particular virus came from, we know that every other pandemic and epidemic that we faced as humans has been as a result of our exposure to and proximity to animals and the way that we farm them. And interestingly, most epidemics are as a result of things like bird flu, which is far more likely when you're intensively farming chickens, which is what we do today. So that's something also to reflect on, is our risk of future pandemics as well as other infectious diseases. But it's not just about the planet. It's not just about our risk of infectious diseases. I'd love to share with you a story, and it really is a very inspirational story. I'm hoping that I can lift the mood. That we've been talking about the downsides of the animal agriculture industry. I'd like to be able to show you the upsides of eating more plants, which is what we're here for today. I have a very good friend whose story I'd love to share. He's called Brendan, and he was going to work one day, and he suddenly developed shortness of breath. And he thought, oh, that's strange. It was a few days before his 37th birthday. He got quite short of breath. He thought, I need to go back to the gym. He realized how unfit he'd become. Then the next day, he was walking to work, and he became so short of breath that his chest was heaving and he had to sit down. And he knew something wasn't right, so he went to the doctors. The doctor gave him an inhaler, an antacid, gave him an ECG. Everything looked okay, but they decided to refer him for an exercise test to be on the safe side. So he had an exercise test, and he was unable to perform it. He couldn't even walk. So they did a nuclear imaging test instead, where they injected dye into the vessels around the heart. And what they discovered was really concerning. Half of the screen was blank, and the other half lit up like a Christmas tree. And the part of the screen that was blank, a bit like this photograph here, you'll see there's a dramatic reduction in blood flow at the bottom compared to the top. they realized that the main artery supplying blood to his heart was completely blocked. It's called the left anterior descending, the LAD, and it's traditionally known as the widowmaker. So when it's blocked, you usually have a sudden heart attack, which is similar to what happened to my own father and grandfather. He was in shock. The doctor told him to go to the hospital immediately and to have a stent put in his heart. His mind was whirring. By that point, he just turned 37, and he realized that he could potentially have dropped dead at any minute. And when he had the stent put in, the shortness of breath and the chest discomfort that he was experiencing had melted away. So he felt very relieved, but the thought just kept on nagging at him. I'm 37 years old. What happens when the stent gets blocked up? How many more years of life do I have? And he'd remembered going to see a documentary film called Forks Over Knives with a doctor friend of his. And he put it to the back of his mind when he'd seen it, but he decided to rewatch it. And it's a documentary about some of the benefits of eating a whole foods, plant-based diet for health. He watched it, and then he decided that the chicken meal that he was given in the hospital that day was the last piece of meat that he was going to eat. He decided to buy himself a big, expensive blender when he got home, a Vitamix, and he began to change his lifestyle. And incredibly, he was able to complete a cardiac rehabilitation program, which I think initially he really struggled with. He was about a generation younger than most of the people in the room, but he managed to get through it. And from barely being able to stand on the treadmill when he arrived, he was able to lose several kilos in weight and run a good 5K by the time he'd finished the cardiac rehab. Fast forward a year, and he'd run an Ironman event, and he was also running marathons. He was feeling full of vitality and hope and optimism for the life that he had waiting for him. And since then, I'm also really excited to tell you that he's also had a baby son. So this story really struck me because it really personifies a lot of the data that we already have on how eating more plants can be beneficial for heart health, and not just preventing it, but also improving the heart disease that already exists. And I've seen that in my patients as well, time and again. 4 of my patients here were kind enough to share their images and their story. And we have John here, Linda, Perry, and Michelle. Now, they were all able to help bring back control to their blood pressure, reverse their symptoms of asthma, reverse their symptoms of Crohn's disease, liver dysfunction, hot flushes, and mood issues, and, as I say, blood pressure, all of these things with adopting a predominantly plant-based diet, if not a completely whole foods plant-based diet. Now, I share these images to hopefully bring the possibility to life that it may actually be really beneficial for you to consider how many plants you eat on a day-to-day basis, and how to include more plants in your routines. Because the data is clear. It's not just about stories. I love to talk about data as well. The World Health Organization tells us that processed meats are indeed a class 1 carcinogen, which means that we know that they are cancerous. They increase the risk of cancer. And red meats are a class 2 carcinogen, which means that they're a probable cancer risk. And the World Cancer Research Fund tells us that the absolute cornerstone of a cancer-preventing diet is the consumption of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, things like beans, chickpeas, lentils, peas. These are the kinds of foods that will help to prevent cancer moving forward. Now, remember what I said earlier, about 1 in 2 of us will experience cancer. So it's really important to know some of the things that could potentially help get us through that, and certainly potentially minimize our risk. Now, there's a lot to it, but one of the things that I love to touch upon is the microbiota gut-brain axis, because, of course, there are so many different factors at play when we eat our food. It's really information, the food. And what it does is it provides information to the body to let the body know which genes to switch on and which genes to switch off. And that all happens through the gut. And the gut has an amazing way of communicating with the brain, both through the vagus nerve and through the immune system. About 70% of our immune cells lie right next to the gut lining, and also through the microbes that grow in our gut. and we're able to actually feed those microbes with the fiber that we eat. So essentially, if you'd not heard it before, dietary fiber is the main beneficial food source for healthy gut bugs. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, chickpeas, what they do is they provide really useful fuel and nutrition for healthy gut bugs. And why is that important? Healthy gut bugs drive so much of our health. They're able to maintain a strong gut barrier function, supporting our immune health, helping to modulate our hormonal health, and also has effects in various different ways. So the pictures here in this slide show that you can see in your skin sometimes where your gut health is not optimal because you'd be having increased risk of things like psoriasis, inflammatory arthritis, autoimmune conditions such as lupus. And when we're able to gradually improve our gut health, we can also potentially improve some of these downstream consequences to the rest of our body. And I'd love to also just touch on longevity. Which populations of people live the longest? Well, there was actually some research into this by a researcher and journalist called Dan Buettner, and he aimed to look at the areas of the world with the longest healthy longevity, the largest amount of people that lived up to the age of 100 or near the age of 100. And he was able to look at 5 hotspots: Okinawa in Japan, Ikaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy, Loma Linda in California, and Nicoya in Costa Rica. And what they all have in common, they're all quite different, aren't they? So you wouldn't necessarily expect immediately that there'd be a lot of similarities between them. But actually, when you look at the similarities, what you see is something quite amazing. All of these populations have around a 95% plant-based diet or more in some cases. For example, some of the Loma Linda population would be 100% plant-based, but otherwise the rest of them had a 95% plant-based diet. They also had other things in common. They had sort of close-knit communities. They really prioritized family, and they felt a sense of belonging and purpose in their lives. Many of them had a religious belief that helped to connect them to people in their communities. And they would spend a lot of time moving their bodies. They wouldn't be going to the gym necessarily, but they would be just walking, moving, feeling useful, tending the land, and doing things that essentially helped keep their hearts healthy, moving their bodies as well. And I find these lessons really interesting because this is essentially what most of us want. We don't want to live a long life if it's an unhealthy life. We want to be able to live a life of vitality and meaning. And so in order to do that, I think it's helpful to look at some of the patterns of living that people who have managed to achieve this do. And this brings me on to a bit more detail when it comes to the food aspect, at least, of what gives you a long, healthy life. And I wanted to share with you the Canadian food guidelines that came out in 2019. I like this picture a lot because it gives you a very real understanding of the kind of ratio of foods that would ideally be on your daily plate. We want to really pack in those fruits and veggies, and they should consist about half of what we're eating. And a lot of the data around human health shows us that the more servings of fruits and veggies that we eat, the better. I know we all talk about the 5 a day, but there was actually research from London University which showed that up to 10 portions a day would provide loads more benefits than the 5 portions a day. And in fact, they couldn't find an upper limit where benefits were not being potentially experienced. So think variety, think color. Try not to get stuck in a rut of the usual veggies that you buy. You may just want to buy maybe, you might be in a routine of buying lots of carrots, for example, or, peas and sweet corn. My advice to you would really be to mix that up, because the data shows us that the more variety that we eat in fruits and vegetables, the more diverse our gut microbiome, and the better our ability to potentially ward off long-term illness, which includes autoimmune diseases, cancers, heart disease, and diabetes. Looking at the rest of the plate, you'll see there's also sort of about a quarter protein-rich foods and a quarter whole grain food. So this is important Whole grains are really very valuable to our health. Studies show that long-term longevity increases the more whole grains we consume. So think about your own patterns. Do you have a lot of white bread, white rice, white pasta? If so, maybe think about switching it up if you can. Maybe getting yourself whole grain versions of those foods and adding in other whole grains for variety as well. Things you might not have thought of, like amaranth or buckwheat or quinoa. And for those of you who need to eat a gluten-free diet, there are actually plenty of gluten-free grains that you can start to experiment with, as we know that the data shows us that healthy whole grains are really good for a long-term health. And protein-rich foods as well. You'll see that there's lots of different variety when it comes to protein-rich foods. And the beauty of a whole foods plant-based diet is that if you're eating a lot of beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, tempeh, and some of the healthier soy-based meat replacements, you're actually getting a really good source of protein and fiber at the same time, which will, again, help to optimize your microbiome. You'll notice also with the Canadian food guidelines, there's something that they skip, which many of the food guidelines don't, and that's actually dairy. They have actually used independent dietitians and researchers to come up with these guidelines, which is really interesting because many of the other food guidelines around the world work in conjunction with the food industry, and you'll see dairy in there as a necessary food group. Whereas the research tells us that actually, although dairy can be part of a healthy diet, it's not actually necessary for human health, and there are potentially some disadvantages as well. The pictures on the right show, just as a reminder, that herbs and spices are really important for not only improving the flavor and versatility of your meals, but also to provide really important health benefits and antioxidants. So get creative in the spice cupboard if you haven't already. Have a look at different recipes that use a nice variety of herbs and spices. Doesn't have to be hot, but it can really improve some of the flavors of the foods that you're making. And I also try to generally advise people to think about maybe the 5 or 6 ingredient rule. So when you're at the supermarket, have a little look around. And if the product that you're going to buy has a very, very, very long list of ingredients, it may increase the chances that it's an ultra processed food, which we know has a potential to increase our long-term cancer risk. So try and keep it simple. Try and go for the whole foods where you can. Ideally, foods that don't contain ingredient lists at all. You know what an apple looks like, and you know that it doesn't contain anything else apart from an apple, for example. But when you do buy processed foods, which a lot of us do, aim to go for the ones that have less of a long list of ingredients where possible. I really like this, and I hope that it's something that might be useful for you. Feel free to screenshot this. This is the Plant-Based Eat Well Guide, and it's an adaptation of Public Health England's Eat Well Guide that was published in 2016. And what it does is it aims you to transition to a healthy and sustainable diet and shows food groups in the proportions that they should roughly contribute in the overall diet. So you'll see there, similar to the Canadian food guidelines, there's a big emphasis there on fruits and veggies. They don't all have to be fresh. A lot of that can be potentially frozen foods, chopped tomatoes, dried fruits and veggies as well can count, and whole grains again. So you can see from this list, it's quite nice. You can see rye bread, whole wheat pasta, things like porridge, quinoa, buckwheat. And they also add in the importance of adding in things like flax seeds and chia seeds for your omega-3s, beans, pulses, nuts and seeds and plant proteins. And they've also got a section there on some plant-based dairy alternatives that you might like to try. Oils and fats are part of a healthy plant-based diet, but you can see that they're quite a small part. So just choose wherever you can unsaturated oils and use them in small amounts when you do. And they've put the unhealthy products to the side just to show that they're not an essential part of the diet, but they're an add-on, sometimes food if you wish to consume them. This was made by Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, and they offer a lot of great resources and information leaflets, and I'm an ambassador for them as well. Now, this slide just shows you all that although this talk is about Veganuary and diet and nutrition, I'm a holistic health doctor as well, and I recognize that there are so many other aspects to health and happiness. Finding meaning in our life is really important, whatever we're up to. giving love to the people around us, feeling gratitude for the gifts that we have and the experiences that we have, trying to minimize the amount of stress that we feel as a result of the things that happen in our lives, moving our bodies more, sleeping well, getting outside in nature, breathing that fresh air. All those things are really important for a rounded, sort of healthy lifestyle. And they're what I would like to call the foundations of health. And when you have one of those things that is out of sync for long enough, that's when the actual house of health, if you like, will start to crumble. So it's really important just to highlight that it's not just about the food. But if you did want some advice about how to go about starting, where do you even begin? Veganuary is a really great option because you can sign up on their website, which I've put on this slide, and they send you daily email updates, tips, advice, recipes, information, things that will help to keep you going, basically, if you're feeling a little bit stuck or you're not sure what to make. And it's become more and more popular, which is fantastic. And what's great is that when people do take part in Veganuary, it actually encourages companies to provide more plant-based options. It provides restaurants to provide more menu options, and it sort of starts a plant-based revolution in a certain way, because many of those products remain on the market throughout the rest of the year. So it's a really exciting initiative, and I'd encourage you to sign up and just check it out and see what you think of it. This is a photo just to give you an idea of what you might get. It's by no means what I would say an ideal or an optimal shopping list, but many people struggle to think, well, what do I actually buy at the supermarket if I'm going to eat more whole plant foods? So this photo just gives you an idea. There's packaged vegetables and fruits. Ideally, we wouldn't have all that plastic, but what can I say? I think we all have to start somewhere, don't we? But it's just a nice way of seeing the kind of foods that you might want to have more of when you go to the weekly shop. Luckily, there's loads of free resources that you can look at online. So yes, you can buy recipe books, and I've got plenty that have really helped me over the years, but you can also get so much information for free. And depending on what you're into, depends on which website you like to try. So Forks Over Knives is a great one for healthy whole food cooking. Deliciously Ella on the right is just a lovely healthy plant-based recipe website as well. She's got great cookbooks. She's got an app. And for those of you who are into sports and nutrition, you might like to check out the Game Changers website, where they've got loads of great recipes there as well. And over the next few slides, I'm hoping to get you drooling. I'm hoping to get you feeling inspired and like you want to try some of these tasty foods. Here are some breakfast ideas. These are my plant-powered pancakes on the left. Really simple and straightforward to make. 5 ingredients. Just got a bit of soy milk and banana. You've got a tiny little bit of flour there. Mix it up. I've actually got the recipe on my Instagram, and I'll share it with you if you'd like to see it. And porridge is a great way to start. You can add in flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, seeds, fresh fruit, berries, bit of maple syrup, maybe a little bit of tahini or peanut butter or almond butter, and it really gets you off to a great start in the morning. You can make a plant-powered smoothie, whole grain toast with a variety of toppings. The choice is yours. Lunch, again, it can be very simple. There's loads of places out and about now that do some really healthy whole food options. Salads are great, obviously. People at this time of year tend to gravitate more towards comfort foods, of course. And I'd love to share, if it's not too much of a humble brag, my book contains some amazing recipes. So these are photographs from my own book, which I've got here actually. I'm not sure if you can see that. The Plant Power Doctor. I've got a delicious shepherd's pie recipe. This is my tofu stir fry. A delicious cauliflower and chickpea curry recipe. My yummy apricot sort of cobbler dish. That's a dessert. So you'll see that there's loads of comfort foods available as well that will really help to fill us up. Delicious, nutritious foods. Now, lots of people ask me about supplementation. There's a whole chapter on that in my book. What I would say is it is important to supplement vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is vital for human health. And if you eat an exclusively plant-based diet, it's going to be very hard to get enough. You can get B12 from fortified milks, fortified breakfast cereals, fortified margarines, Marmite, nutritional yeast. But I prefer just to let people know to take a supplement so they can guarantee they're getting enough. Now, interestingly, vitamin B12 deficiency is actually commonest around the world in meat eaters because there are many people that struggle to get enough. If you're over the age of 50, or if you have any condition that will reduce the amount of B12 you can absorb from the stomach, things like celiac disease, Crohn's disease, autoimmune issues, diabetes, if you're on antacid drugs, many of these things will actually limit the amount of B12 you can absorb. So I would recommend supplementation for lots of people, not just those who are on an exclusively plant-based diet. We also have to remember that the animal agriculture industry actually supplements animal feed with B12. So the cows and the chickens and the pigs that we eat, they'll contain B12 in their muscles, but they actually get given extra supplementation to make sure that they've got enough too. So in a way, it's a little bit like cutting out the middleman or the middle cow. I also recommend vitamin D supplementation for everyone, regardless of diet, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. In the UK, we're not getting enough sunlight to fulfill our vitamin D needs. There's been some great studies in the pandemic to show how important vitamin D was for health and for the healthy functioning of our immune system. So grab yourself a vitamin D3 supplement if you can. Government guidance is about 400 micrograms a day. I tend to suggest more. Between 1,000 and 2,000 micrograms a day is my advice. And if you're not sure, you can always get your blood levels checked by your own doctor. I also like to suggest an algae oil supplement. Now, there's not enough evidence to suggest that we actually need to do this. And as I mentioned before, there are some great plant-based sources of omega-3s. We've got flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts to start with. And it's lovely to be able to put a tablespoon of flax seeds, milled flax seeds in our porridge or in stews or whatever we're making. We can actually use it as a great egg replacer in baking as well. But someone's knocked on my door and my dog's barking. I'm sorry for that. I think it's just a package, so I'm going to leave that for now. But yeah, I think it's worth taking an algae oil supplement because it's ready-made omega-3s that you get from fish. And that's one of the main reasons that we like to eat fish is the omega-3 content. And the fish get their omega-3 from algae that they eat. So really, again, you're going right back to the source to ensure that you're getting a great and pure source of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Again, we don't have the evidence to say that it's really needed, but I think it's a nice way to supplement your healthy diet if you can afford to do so. Now, I just also want to briefly highlight the fact that Veganuary and vegan diets are really fantastic for planetary health, but sometimes, they're not always necessarily the healthiest. I mean, you'll see this image, this lady's trying to choose between her plate of chips and a salad. They're both vegan, but of course, many of us will turn to comfort foods when we're feeling low. It's not our instinct to reach for a plate of steamed broccoli. We'd rather reach for a donut or some crisps or a glass of wine. And that's human nature and completely understandable. But if we're aware of some of those things that help us to gravitate towards these unhealthy foods, then it's really a great way of understanding, well, what our own triggers are. Can we make sure that we're sort of buying more of these healthy options and making more of these delicious foods that can comfort us in a different way? And again, going back to my patients, I really like to emphasize the importance of finding your why. And hopefully this will resonate with some of you watching today. Why is it that you'd like to try a more plant-based approach? Is it for personal health? Is it for the planet? Is it for the compassion of the animals? And when it came to my patients, Linda wanted to have a more plant-based diet because she wanted to have the energy to help care for her disabled husband. Jose wanted to improve his body aches. He was getting a lot of joint pains and he wanted to improve that. Michelle wanted to improve her hot flushes and some of the hormonal symptoms that she was experiencing. And for Perry, well, he just wanted to get his driving license back. He had lost his driving license because of his very high blood pressure. And he worked as a HGV driver at the airport. For him, it was really important to be able to get his job back, something that he enjoyed more than anything. And we hadn't managed to achieve a healthy blood pressure with tablets alone. And he didn't want to be necessarily taking tablets for the rest of his life. So We talked at length, and he decided a plant-based diet to help bring his blood pressure down, which he did admirably. It was amazing. And I was able to help him get back to work just a few short weeks later when he had stabilized his blood pressure using the power of nutrition. So I hope that their stories have inspired you. I would love for you now to think about your own life and your own wants, needs, and desires. Just take this time while I'm talking to think what it is that you want to prioritize for you. Now, it might not necessarily be personal health, it might be something else entirely, but just if you close your eyes, maybe, or even just look at this picture and just feel what it is to really prioritize the things that are important to you. Maybe even do a body scan and think about any issues in your own health that you might want to face head on. And just take a moment to let your mind wander and dream about what a happier, healthier life might look like to you. Is there something that you'd really like to achieve? Is there something that you'd really like to help someone else with? Have a think about that now. And then also think about what you're currently doing that would actively support those goals. What are you currently doing in your life that actually brings you a step closer to the goals that you have and to the values that are really important to you? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you partaking in community events? Are you moving your body each day? What kind of foods are you taking in? What are you doing right now that helps to support your health and that you can feel really good about? If you have a pen and paper, you could perhaps even pause the video if you're going to be watching this back and write some of these things down, because it's quite rare for us to take that opportunity, take that chance to think, and even rarer to write those things down. So have a think now. Is there anything in your body that you'd like to improve in terms of your health? And is there anything that you'd like to achieve that having a healthier body might help you to do? Now it's worth having a think about how a healthy plant-based diet could be a powerful tool in helping you to achieve that. Is there one thing that you think that you might like to change as a result of the talk that I've given you today? A simple swap that you'd like to do? Many people find that adding in the healthy stuff is a great way of crowding out the less healthy stuff. So it could be going to the supermarket rather than going online and seeking out a different fruit or vegetable that you've never tried before. It could be doing an online shop and seeking out different things that you haven't looked at before, adding them into your cart. It could be thinking of your top 2 or 3 favorite recipes that you do now and thinking about how you could make them more plant-based. Swapping out your beef bolognese for lentil bolognese, maybe giving chickpea curry a go instead of a chicken curry, making a 3-bean chili instead of a beef chili, for example. Simple ways that you could swap out one thing and replace it with another. Swapping out for a different plant milk that you'd like to try. Maybe even just starting with breakfast, thinking about how you could make the first meal of the day one where you're going to be prioritizing an abundance of plants, fresh fruits or veggies, even whole grains, things like that. So once you've had a think, maybe take the chance to write that down so you can remember the thoughts that you had. And if you did want to ask me any questions after the talk, I'm happy to take them. I'm looking forward to seeing if there's any questions there for me now. But if you think of anything that you'd like to ask in the future, please feel free to message me. You can go onto my website where I have loads of free resources for you. There's sections on things like diabetes and heart disease and cancer and holistic health, which I've talked a little bit about, but there's so much more information on my website. And on Instagram, my handle is Plant Power Doctor. So you can follow me and message me on Instagram. And on Facebook, you can find me under Dr. Gemma Newman. And of course, I did mention the book earlier, but my book has a tremendous amount of information, nearly 600 scientific references, color-coded. It's a nice coffee table book because it's got a lot of great illustrations and colorful photographs of some lovely recipes as well. So it's kind of like a full why to and how to of plant-based nutrition. And I look forward to hearing from you with any questions or any great stories you can tell me about how it may have improved your own health. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to come out of presentation mode and see if there's any questions that you might have for me. Let's see. Oh, okay. So there's quite a few different comments. And somebody said that they're really happy they became vegetarian. And somebody else has said that they've been going off meat for some time and that the talk today has nailed that decision, and that they've just bought my book, which is lovely. And they're looking forward to a plant-based healthy future. Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm looking forward to it for you as well. Karen has shared Dr. John McDougall's website. Yes, he's a real plant-powered pioneer from the US, and he has lots of free YouTube research papers and links. So that's a lovely piece of information. Thank you, Karen. And Pamela asked if there was a way to increase the slides because the writing was too small. Well, a lot of it was picture-based, and I didn't see that obviously until now, but I don't think that there was a way of doing so. If you want to go back and look at the replay, maybe take some screenshots and zoom in. And if there's any photographs that you'd like to see more of the text, then message me and I'll see if I can send it to you directly. Let's see. Margaret says that she loves to do a 30-day plan twice a year and then follow healthy habits. So that sounds like a really nice idea. It's a nice way of adding in new habits each year, isn't it? Once you've dialed down on one habit that you like, adding in another one each year is a lovely way of doing it. Julie has said that she's been vegetarian since she was 14 and she wants to get rid of dairy, which is her goal now. Sounds like a fantastic goal. As I said, there's some great tips and resources both in my book and on the Veganuary website, as well as Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. They've got some great tips and tricks as well. Julie said that for her, it's personal health, but also to live as long as possible, to see her family grow. Now, isn't that lovely? I feel the same way, with my grandfather when he died so young, and my father too. My dad never got the chance to see his grandsons, which I often think is a real shame. And many of our families have similar stories of heartbreak and missed opportunities. And what's interesting is that 80% of reversible, preventable chronic diseases happen as a result of lifestyle. And the vast majority of the lifestyle changes that we've researched show that having a plant-rich diet is going to be so vital and important to sort of minimizing those risks. So I hope that some of the stories I shared today help those research findings to feel more real and feel more applicable to your own families and health, and that you'll feel inspired to share some of those messages with the people that you love because you want to see them hanging around for as long as possible. Karen's again commented that she's vegan, whole food, plant-based. And she's pleased to see that I talked about small and consistent changes, particularly in Veganuary, where it can be a lot of pressure on newbies. Yes, you're right. I don't expect anybody to necessarily jump headfirst all in at once. It can be quite overwhelming. I think for many of us, baby steps are often the way forward. It's certainly the most sustainable way to shift habits, little things that we can fit easily into our lifestyle. Is definitely the best way forwards. Lots of thank yous, which is great. Someone's asked if I can recommend any foods for hot flushes. Well, if I could give you one top tip, it would probably be to incorporate a portion of soy every day. Minimally processed soy products such as tofu, tempeh, edamame beans, soy milk as well, fortified soy milk. These are great ways of helping to modulate our hormonal ups and downs through menopause. There was a study done on bone health as well in women of menopausal age, and they had a control group, a group that was given progesterone supplementation and a group that was given a glass of soy milk a day. And what they discovered was that the ladies who were in the control group had a natural decline in their bone mineral density over time, which you'd expect. And those that were on the progesterone supplement had less of a decline in their bone mineral density. And those that had a glass of soy milk a day had a slight increase in their bone mineral density. So the other thing that's important about soy is that it's called a selective estrogen receptor modulator, which means that it actually binds to our estrogen receptors in a beneficial way, improving our bone strength, but also potentially minimizing our risk of hormonal cancers such as breast cancer and endometrial cancer. And they also have an impact potentially on reducing hot flushes, which are actually far less common in countries like Japan, where they have a high intake of minimally processed soy products. So they'll have things like miso soup quite a lot. So if you want to buy some miso paste and add it to create a miso-based soup, and they will obviously have a lot of things like edamame beans and tofu as well. If you have osteoporosis, somebody's asked me about that. It's really important to optimize your sources of calcium and vitamin D, and also to get a lot of things like weight-bearing exercise and resistance exercise. And that doesn't mean you have to go to the gym, but it does mean making an effort to actually maintain the muscle mass that you already have, because our muscle mass does decline over the years, especially past the menopause, and physical movement is one of the best ways of maintaining that muscle. So even grabbing a couple of cans of beans and doing some sort of exercises with those, arm exercises with those, will be a great way to start. Aiming to maintain the muscle mass that you have. Physical exercise and movement is a great way of maintaining core stability and reducing risk of frailty, and that includes risk of osteoporosis. That vitamin D supplement that I talked about earlier, that's going to be really important as well. And thinking about calcium-rich plant sources, so calcium-fortified tofu, green leafy vegetables, things like that. What else? Tahini, dried apricots, other sort of dried fruits and nuts are great sources of calcium. But have a look for yourself. Find the sources of calcium that you think you'll be able to incorporate most in your diet. And if you want, you can even go on to Chronometer or Chronometer, which is a website that helps you to track how much of various nutrients you're getting to make sure that you're optimizing your calcium intake on a plant-based diet. And Julie has said that we're so lucky these days to have professional people like you, Gemma, to help us make the right changes into our lives. Thank you so much. Oh, Julie, that's really kind. Thank you. I feel lucky to have the chance to talk to you today with the Royal Voluntary Service. I hope that it's been helpful and that you've enjoyed it. And as I say, if there's any other follow-up questions that you have for me, feel free to get in touch, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much. And I think that will call it a day now. So thanks for having me.